This story chilled us to the core. A subscriber shared their terrifying experience during the Palisades wildfire, a fire that wasn't just destroying the land, but seemed alive. What you're about to hear will make you question what really happened that day. It started on a Friday evening. I remember the exact date because we had planned a small family dinner that night. Something simple, just my partner, our dog, and me. The weather had been unbearably dry for weeks, and the news had been warning about fire risks in the Palisades area. I brushed it off like most people do. Wildfires were common, but they always seemed to happen to someone else. Around 6 p.m., our phones buzzed with the evacuation alert. At first, I didn't take it seriously. The fire seemed far away. But within minutes, the sky turned orange, and the smell of smoke seeped into the house. Standing on the front porch, I saw the glow of flames on the horizon. It was closer than I thought, and the wind was picking up. We scrambled to pack what we could. Important documents, some clothes, the dog's leash. It all felt rushed, and in hindsight, I know I wasn't thinking clearly. As we drove away, the smoke thickened, and the sight of neighbors doing the same added to the panic. By the time we reached the main road, I looked back and realized I might never see our house again. That thought lingered in my mind, but what hit me later was the sense that I had forgotten something important. It wasn't until we reached the evacuation center that I remembered my grandmother's necklace. She'd left it to me before she passed, and I always kept it in a box in the living room. It should have been just another item, something I could let go of in an emergency. But that night, it felt like I had left behind a part of her, a part of myself. I couldn't shake the thought. I knew it was dangerous, but I decided I would go back for it. I waited until early the next morning. My partner begged me not to go back, but I couldn't let it go. The roads were supposed to be blocked off, but I knew a few back routes that the authorities wouldn't have covered yet. I told myself it would be quick. In, grab the necklace, and out. Driving back felt surreal. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky was an unnatural shade of gray-orange, like something out of a dream. I didn't pass another car the entire way. Most people had fled by then, and the silence made it all feel wrong, like I was intruding somewhere I didn't belong. When I turned onto my street, the familiar rows of houses looked different. Some were untouched, while others were blackened skeletons. The fire seemed selective, as though it had chosen certain homes while sparing others. My house stood intact, though the lawn was charred, and smoke lingered in the air like a warning. I parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way, the crunch of ash beneath my boots the only sound. As I got closer, I noticed the odd stillness. No birds, no insects, no distant sirens, nothing. Just the faint crackling of fire somewhere in the distance. The door stuck as I pushed it open, warped from the heat, but the inside was mostly how I'd left it. The air smelled burnt, and the walls were stained with smoke, but nothing had been consumed. I hurried to the living room, where I kept the small box with the necklace. It was still there, undisturbed. I should have left right then, but something stopped me. Standing in the middle of the room, I had the strange feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't a sound or a shadow, just the weight of being watched. I turned toward the window, but there was no one outside. Just smoke and the faint, flickering glow of the fire creeping closer. That was when I noticed the flames on the lawn. They weren't spreading like normal fire. They moved in jagged lines, almost deliberate. It was like they were circling the house. I told myself I was imagining things, that the fire couldn't move like that. It wasn't alive. But as I stood there, clutching the necklace box in one hand, I heard it. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the occasional crackle of the flames. A whisper. It wasn't words, exactly, just a sound like someone breathing right behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. "Hello," I called out, even though I knew no one should be there. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. The air felt heavier, hotter. It wasn't just from the fire. It was as if the room itself was pressing in on me. The whispering came again, louder this time, like it was coming from the walls. I froze, my legs rooted to the spot. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a flicker, like a shadow darting across the room. It was fast, too fast to follow, but it left me feeling exposed, vulnerable. I backed toward the door, gripping the necklace box like it could somehow protect me. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but my feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was everywhere. Around me, above me, beneath me. It rose and fell like the crackling of fire, merging with it until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted out the door, the box clutched tightly to my chest. As I stepped onto the porch, I glanced back over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it. A figure, just for a moment, standing in the hallway, framed by the dim light filtering through the smoke. It wasn't clear, more like an outline, a suggestion of a person. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I knew they were watching me. I stumbled down the steps and onto the street, not daring to look back again. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my keys trying to unlock the car. By the time I got the door open and slammed it shut behind me, I was gasping for air. But as I started the car, I realized something that sent a new wave of dread through me. The fire wasn't on the horizon anymore. It was closer, too close, and it wasn't behaving like fire should. As I drove down the street, I kept glancing at the flames in the rearview mirror. They weren't spreading randomly, like you'd expect. They moved in jagged, almost geometric patterns, cutting across the landscape in ways that didn't make sense. The fire seemed alive, purposeful. It wasn't long before I noticed it wasn't just behind me anymore. A few blocks ahead, the fire suddenly flared to life, blocking the road. There was no way it could have spread that fast. It was as if it had been waiting for me. I hit the brakes, my tires screeching against the pavement. The flames ahead were brighter than they should have been, almost blinding, and the heat radiating from them made it impossible to get any closer. I reversed, trying another route, but the same thing happened. Every path I took, the fire would appear as if anticipating my next move. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My phone had no signal, no way to call for help. I was alone in this strange, burning maze, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The fire didn't want me to leave. I decided to try one last road, a narrow side street I remembered from years ago. It wasn't marked on any map and barely looked like a road at all anymore, overgrown and unmaintained. As I turned onto it, I saw the flames behind me start to shift like they were following. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the car lurching forward. The road was uneven, the tires bouncing over cracks and debris, but I didn't care. I just needed to put as much distance between me and that thing, whatever it was, as possible. That's when I noticed something strange. In the glow of the fire behind me, I saw shapes. They flickered in and out of the haze, barely visible, but they were there. Figures moving in the flames. They didn't look human. Not entirely. Their shapes were elongated, distorted, like shadows stretched too far. They didn't run or walk. They glided, as if they were part of the fire itself. My chest tightened. I couldn't look for too long. Every instinct told me not to. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, hoping against hope that this path would lead me out. But the longer I drove, the more it felt like the flames weren't just blocking my way. They were hurting me. The side street led me deeper into the smoke and haze, and the further I went, the quieter everything became. The fire was still there. I could feel the heat and see the faint glow, but it no longer crackled or roared. It was as if the world had been muted. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another shape in the flames, one of those distorted figures I'd seen earlier. But this one was different. It wasn't moving. It stood perfectly still, framed by the haze ahead. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its outline seemed sharper than the others. For a moment, I thought it might be a person, but there was something off about the way it stood. Its limbs were too long, its posture too rigid, like it wasn't used to holding itself upright. I slowed the car, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. It just stood there, blocking the road. I thought about turning around, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw more of them. Several figures, standing silently in the road behind me, their shapes barely visible through the smoke. My hands tightened on the wheel as I realized I had no choice but to keep going forward. I pressed the gas pedal, the car inching closer to the figure ahead. My headlights barely illuminated it. The smoke seemed to swallow the light, but I could see enough to make my skin crawl. It didn't move, not until I was almost upon it. As I got closer, it tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a shiver down my spine. It was looking at me, or at least I thought it was. I couldn't make out any eyes or features, just the impression of a face that didn't belong in this world. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the car surged forward. The figure didn't move to the side or run away. It just stood there, and for a horrifying second, I thought I was going to hit it, but the car passed through it like it wasn't even there. The moment I cleared the spot where it had been standing, the temperature in the car plummeted. The air felt icy, biting at my skin and making me gasp. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. The road behind me was empty. The shapes and the flames vanished. For a fleeting moment, I thought I was safe, but then I saw it again, far ahead this time, waiting for me at the end of the road. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely keep the car steady. I thought about stopping, about abandoning the car and running on foot, but I didn't know where to go. The fire was everywhere, and those things, seemed to be one step ahead of me no matter what I did. I gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving. The road was narrowing, the overgrown trees on either side closing in like a tunnel. The smoke was thicker here, stinging my eyes and throat. I rolled the windows up, but the car's air vents weren't doing much to keep it out. Ahead, the figure was still there, standing motionless at the end of the road. I slowed down, my pulse racing. Every instinct told me to turn around, but I knew it would be pointless. I'd seen how the fire moved, how it blocked every path I tried. I stopped the car, the engine idling as I stared at the figure. For a moment, everything was still. The fire didn't crackle, the wind didn't blow. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Then it moved. It didn't walk or run. It just shifted. One moment it was standing in the middle of the road, and the next it was closer, much closer. I panicked. My foot slammed on the gas, and the car lurched forward. The figure didn't react. It just stood there, letting the car barrel toward it. I braced myself, expecting the same cold, bone-chilling sensation I'd felt before, but this time was different. The moment the car passed through the figure, the engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered once, then went out completely. I sat there in the dark, my chest heaving as I fought to catch my breath. The air inside the car was freezing now, my breath coming out in shaky white clouds. I turned the key in the ignition, desperate to get the engine started again, but it wouldn't budge. Then I felt it, a presence. Not outside the car, but inside. I didn't dare turn around. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to look, not to acknowledge whatever was sitting in the back seat. But I could feel it there, heavy and cold, like a weight pressing against my spine. The whispering started again, soft and low, right in my ear. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I don't know how long I sat there, too terrified to move, but eventually, the whispering stopped, and the air in the car began to warm. I opened my eyes, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. The headlights flickered back on, and the engine roared to life as if nothing had happened. I didn't question it. I put the car in reverse, turned around, and headed back the way I came. I didn't care about the fire, or the figures, or the necklace. I just wanted to get out. But as I retraced my path, the flames seemed closer than before. They didn't just block the road, they surrounded it, leaving me with no clear way out. As I drove through the encroaching flames, the road seemed to twist in on itself. It felt endless, like I wasn't going anywhere no matter how far I went. The air grew thick, not just with smoke, but with a kind of suffocating heaviness that pressed down on my chest. That's when I saw it, a clearing ahead, just beyond the fire. It was like the flames were avoiding this one spot, forming a perfect circle around it. I didn't want to stop, but something about the clearing felt significant. It was like I was being led there. I slowed the car, the tires crunching on scorched earth, and stepped out. The clearing was eerily silent. The ground was charred black, but there was no heat, no embers. At the center of the clearing stood something that made my stomach churn, a massive tree, or what was left of one. Its bark was blackened and cracked, and its branches stretched upward like skeletal arms. The tree felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. It exuded a sense of presence, as if it were alive and watching me. And then I noticed the carvings. The tree's surface was covered in symbols, intricate, swirling shapes that I couldn't understand, but that made my skin crawl just looking at them. They seemed ancient, older than anything I'd ever seen, and they pulsed faintly, glowing red like dying embers. It hit me then, this was the source. The fire, the figures, the whispers, they all led back to this tree. As I stared at it, I heard the whispering again, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the flames or the figures. It was coming from the tree itself. The words were clearer now, though still in a language I couldn't understand. They rose and fell like a chant, growing louder and faster until I had to cover my ears. That's when I saw the figures again, standing just beyond the circle of flames. Dozens of them now, their elongated shapes blending with the haze. They didn't move or make a sound, they just stood there, watching. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and a deep, resonant sound echoed through the clearing. It wasn't thunder. It was something far older, far more deliberate. I realized then that the fire wasn't just destroying the land. It was protecting something buried beneath this tree. A wave of dread washed over me as I understood what was happening. The fire wasn't spreading naturally because it wasn't natural. It was alive, and it was trying to keep people away from whatever lay beneath the ground. I didn't want to stay long enough to find out what it was. I didn't want to move, but every part of me screamed that I couldn't stay there. Whatever the tree was hiding, whatever had caused this fire to come alive, it wasn't something I was meant to understand. The ground trembled again, harder this time, and the glow from the carvings on the tree grew brighter. The whispering turned into a low hum, a vibration that rattled my teeth and made it hard to think. The figures around the clearing began to move, gliding closer, their outlines flickering like flames caught in the wind. I backed away, trying to keep my eyes on all of them at once, but there were too many. They didn't rush me or try to stop me. They just kept closing in, tightening the circle. Then the tree moved. Its branches groaned, creaking as they twisted toward me. One of the larger limbs stretched downward, the symbols glowing brighter along its length. It wasn't fast, but the deliberate motion filled me with a primal terror, like I was prey being cornered. I stumbled backward and tripped, landing hard on the scorched earth. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment, all I could do was stare up at the branches. They loomed over me, casting jagged shadows against the flickering haze. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, drowning out every other sound. It wasn't just noise. It was in my head, twisting through my thoughts, pulling at memories I hadn't touched in years. It felt like the tree was searching, digging through my mind for something it wanted. "Stop!" I shouted, but my voice sounded weak, lost against the cacophony. That's when I felt the heat behind me. I turned my head just enough to see the fire creeping closer, closing in from all sides. It wasn't spreading erratically anymore. It was moving with purpose, inching toward the clearing, toward me. The flames didn't feel like a threat anymore. They felt like a choice. I had seconds to decide, stay and face whatever the tree was, or risk running into the fire. Neither option seemed survivable, but I couldn't stay there. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the necklace box tighter in my hand. Without giving myself time to think, I turned and ran straight toward the wall of flames. As I reached the edge of the clearing, the fire parted, just slightly, enough for me to slip through. I didn't stop to question it. The heat singed my clothes, and the air burned my lungs, but I kept running. The whispers faded as I put more distance between myself and the clearing. When I finally looked back, I saw the flames close again, sealing the tree and the figures inside. The carvings on the bark glowed one last time, then dimmed, swallowed by the smoke. When I finally made it back to the main road, I didn't stop driving until I reached the evacuation center. My body felt like it was running on autopilot, every nerve in me still vibrating from what I'd seen. I parked the car in the lot and sat there, staring at my shaking hands. The box with my grandmother's necklace was still clutched tightly in my lap. It was the only proof I had that the whole thing wasn't some fever dream. I didn't tell anyone what happened. How could I? What would I even say? That the fire was alive? That the figures in the smoke were real? That some cursed, ancient tree was the heart of it all? No one would believe me. The evacuation orders lifted a week later, but I didn't go back. I couldn't. I sold the house as soon as I could, losing more money than I care to admit, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be as far from that place as possible. Sometimes late at night I think about that tree, about the carvings and the figures and the whispers that still haunt my dreams. I wonder what was buried beneath it, what the fire was trying to protect. I don't want to know. What scares me most is that the fire wasn't extinguished. Sure, the news said it was under control, but I know the truth. That fire wasn't natural, and I don't think it can ever really die. I've seen stories in the papers since then. Small fires, flaring up in the same area, with no clear cause. People go missing sometimes, hikers or locals who get too close. The authorities blame accidents or carelessness, but I know better. Whatever I escaped that day is still out there waiting. Even now, the mystery of that fire remains unsolved. Was it nature, something supernatural, or something we'll never understand? One thing's for sure, some places are better left alone. If you have a story you want to share, send it to us by email, and we might feature it in our next video.